Maybe the last thing I'd say really to NCAT and ATTRA and others in that field of activity is we're losing our elders. We're not capturing, in many cases, their history, their journey. And I'm quite passionate about the organic oral history storytelling activities. There's not nearly enough of it.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist Martine Guerena has a conversation with Bob Scowcroft, the former executive director of both California Certified Organic Farmers and Organic Farming Research Foundation. Bob recounts his involvement with the organic movement, from working as an organizer with Friends of the Earth on pesticide reduction to organizing organic farmers in California and taking part in the development of the National Organic Program. This podcast was recorded outside, so there's a little bit of wind here and there, but stick with it. The conversation is worth it. Let's listen.
Greetings. My name is Martine Guerena, and I'm a Sustainable Ag Specialist with the National Center for Appropriate Technology. Today I'm here at the Ecological Farming Conference at the Asilomar grounds with Mr. Bob Scowcroft. Bob Scowcroft was the former director of the Organic Farming,
Organic Farming Research Foundation.
Yes, OFRF. As well as one of the first directors of California Certified Organic Farmers, which of course are instrumental in the certification process, and it served kind of like the basis of the National Organic Program, if not mistaken. So Bob, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing?
Sure. Good morning to you, and thank you so much for inviting me to sit under these trees and stare out at the Pacific Ocean and the whales that are going by. This is my 40th Ecological Farming Conference. I came to them through 3 different titles. Very first one was the national organizer for Friends of the Earth in '79. And from that activity, that work, I let's say transitioned. At Friends of the Earth, I worked on stopping Agent Orange and a number of toxic 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T. And thanks to 2 remarkable organic activists in '81, I was encouraged to, the way they put it, where there were 9,000 plus toxic chemicals out there, and I'd have to believe in reincarnation to come and fight every one of them. And why didn't I just become an organic advocate and do something positive, work on solutions?
Yeah.
And my gosh, caught my attention.
Yeah.
And so I started working on the California Organic Foods Act on behalf of Friends of the Earth. And that led me to eventually to CCOF and a request that I apply for their very first ED position.
Excellent. And that California Organic Food Act, that was in the 90s, 1990?
Well, that was the second one. The first one was done by an assemblyman named Sam Farr.
Yes.
And it was, Vic Fazio had a definition, 26569.11. And it's scary that I can still remember that and throw those numbers out. And if you use the word organic, you had to put that number on your label. It had no enforcement. It was 4 pages. It's very simple. And it had a sunset clause. It was going to go out of, it was going to disappear if nobody would use it. And Stuart Fishman from Rainbow Grocery and Cy Wiseman from the North Coast CCOF chapter wanted it permanent. So they got Sam Farr to put in an amendment to make it permanent. And that's when they found me, and they wanted a letter from David Brower and Friends of the Earth to support that.
Now, that was at the state level.
That was at the state level, 1980, 81.
81. So how did it evolve into what we know now as the National Organic Program?
In 87, I had applied for and was honored to receive the first position, a full-time position of CCOF CD. And almost immediately, a lot of things happened almost immediately. But one of the big ones was something called the carrot caper, where a gentleman was bagging Mexico carrots into certified organic bags and down in Southern California and selling them all over the country.
As organic.
As organic. And the boards, what are we going to do? There's no enforcement. We need a law. And we put together a plan. Mark Lipson was already my partner in professional agitation and organizing. Maybe you can interview him some other time.
Yes.
Or maybe you already have. But we took a risk. We decided to write a new, more modern California organic law, while at the same time going to the newspapers. If we weren't willing to expose our verification program and defend organic in every corner of the marketplace, then what were we here for?
Right.
And I had known a reporter from Friends of the Earth and worked with him, and it was quite a little, almost a separate tale of media impact. But he got one of his first front page above the fold stories. And I had an anonymous friend who actually took photos of them in his packing house of Mexican carrot bags becoming organic carrot bags. Right. And the Mercury News took the photos at great trepidation. And the story was published. AP, National News, CCOF defends organic, and we need a new law for criminal. This was a criminal act.
Sure.
And luckily, that put him out of business, put the buyers on notice that they were buying that it was fake. And that brought Oregon Tilth and Washington Tilth and CCOF together to say, you know what, the law they're working on in California, we should make it standard to these 3 states, because there's now economic activity, marketing between 3 states, and we should all have the same rules. So,
standards.
So the elders, you just say the carrot caper, and they go, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a wild time."
Yeah. So that was in the late 80s?
That was 88, 89.
Okay.
So the 3 states did the Western Alliance of Certification Organizations. No budget, no money, just dedicated staff.
Yeah.
We always got a laugh out of calling ourselves WACO.
That was the acronym.
That was the acronym. And during that activity, a woman named Kathleen Merrigan contacted us and said, I'm a staffer at Senator Leahy's office. Vermont NOFA has contacted Leahy, Maine Organic Farmers, MOFCA, Pennsylvania Sustainable Ag. They're all talking about organic, verification, enforcement. And we should, and so I did some work for Senator, and there's 27 states, something there talking about it. It's not the same. What do you guys think about writing the Organic Foods Production Act? That's how that came about.
Interesting. So it arose not only here in California and on the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, but also from Maine and other states in the country.
Yeah, but back in the day, all 29 states like to say that they were the first ones to. There's a classic organic farmer.
Sure.
I grew those tomatoes first. Great tomatoes first. But yeah, I feel rather strongly that it was the Western group, along with MOFCA and Vermont NOFA. There's really 5 of us that had started in the 70s as all volunteer, and evolved into, we need a law around the same time we wrote the law.
Well, I recall I entered the industry in the 90s, early 90s, with Pure Pack down in Southern California. That was one of the biggest organic growers at the time. At that time also, there was the ALAR scandal.
Yes.
Where there was, was it a pesticide that was on apples, and the residues were high, and they were being sold throughout the country. And so that kind of created an awareness of the toxicity involved in food production. So there was a big turn towards organic. Is that right? I recall working with Pure Pack that we couldn't meet the demand. And
it got a little insane, actually.
It did.
Doing it.
And also there was bad feelings that big farming operations like that were starting to go organic. And the smaller organic farmer, 1, 2, 3 acres, saw that as a disadvantage of them ruining the market. How did you cope with that, or how did you handle that? Since you were certifying, right? You were certifying these operations.
Yeah, I actually have a backstory that I'm not sure I've told on the record before.
Okay.
But it's not newsworthy at this point,
Okay.
30 years later. But through Friends of the Earth and Brower, you got to know the men and women at the Sierra Club and at NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, and some of the big ones. And at some point, a good friend there pulled me aside and said, we're working on this report with 60 Minutes. There's 30 chemicals that are clearly toxic, clearly have been, EPA, they're just not doing their freaking jobs. They're cancer causing. We know it. We have the proof, and we're going to do a big report on it. 30 of them, and we're going to launch it on 60 Minutes. And we have sort of a side group that we've helped start, but they're independent, and they're going to be the spokesperson for this, and have their own voice. And so we all, are you ready? We'd like to offer you as a resource, in case anybody brings up the organic word, because we're not, that's too crazy. Again, because I won't name, it's just that's not for us. We don't do this. It's too radical. Hippies, a lot of hippies and tie-dye would come up during those days, which had an element of truth to it. But anyways, it went on 60 Minutes. We all watched it, and it was just one chemical. They didn't write about the other 29 equally frightening. They picked, the apple. Right. They picked alar. And the group that they had, NRDC, had kind of put forward as the spokesperson on this was something called Mothers and Others for a Livable Planet. And Mothers and Others was a woman named Wendy Gordon, and another woman some folks have heard of named Meryl Streep.
Oh yeah.
and they did a little bit, I think, on 60 Minutes, so on and so forth. Then there was a buzz, in the news, and the conventional industry was upset about it, and the EPA has approved it, and how dare you, and NRDC this and that. So about 3 weeks later, but they never said organic. Right. Meryl went on the Donahue show. Okay. As part of the, and Donahue looked at her and said, well, it's all this and that, and there are alternatives, and they say there really aren't, and it's all safe, and maybe you can wash them. And, literally Meryl Streep leaned forward and said, I only feed my children certified organic food. Organic is the answer, and that's where we should go.
And this was at a national audience.
This is, the Donahue show was like what people watched. It was the Oprah of its time. Yeah. And I saw that and went, holy expletive. Yeah. I got to get to the office. And ABC Evening News, the phone, we had there's things called dial phones.
Yes, I remember those.
and we broke it, picking it up and putting it down, and picking it up and putting it down with the wave of calls we got. CCOF went from 180 growers in its program to over 700 in 12 months. Wow. And because the way CCOF structure was designed, you paid a $25 fee, and then paid, like the produce industry works, you paid an assessment on your sales the next year. So here we had to manage 700 farmers certification with no income to do that. So now what do I do? Right. I sort of have the staff. Mm-hmm. I have no money, can't pay payroll coming up, and so a farmer and I went to the three of us got together, and we said, we took it to a foundation, said, could you give us some money just to cover us over, a loan or a grant? And they looked and said, we can't give you money. You're an agricultural trade association or 501c5. And I'll hold her name too, but she looked at me and said, Bob, what you should do is just get a research foundation. Some of that money can go right to CCOF. I know you can do it. You go found an organic research foundation, and we would be honored to make the first grant. So the two farmers and I looked at each other and said, "Oh, great! We're now going to found another organization." And we did it.
Yes, you did.
The day we got the termination letter, there was something called fax machines. This is how fast the technology is.
I remember
moved.
those. Yeah.
And I faxed her the termination letter, and they made a fantastic grant that
Great.
covered our nonprofit expenses
Sure.
side of our work.
Yeah, so OFRF is a great group. I just got a grant actually a couple years ago to do solarization, biosolarization work, and there's numerous other organic on-farm research opportunities.
What was brilliant about it was that we found and corralled in farmer researchers who were doing trials and experimenting on their own farms, sometimes in collaboration with the university, but almost all the time not.
Right.
All they were doing was sharing, "Hey, I did this and tried, and I worked for a couple of years. It's risky.
Right.
Tell me if you want to try it. Tell me what you think."
Yeah.
And so we required certified organic farmers to be on the board.
Yeah.
Certified organic farmers that had some academic or research understanding to be on the board. And then the certified organic farmers made the decisions on who to make the grants to. My job was to raise all the money that they gave away. And it was stressful, and of course I retired from that.
Sure.
Really, it's just fundraising is so hard year in and year out.
Yeah.
But it was a dynamic time and a dynamic place, and we came up with freaking great ideas. And of course, Mark Lipson joined us and worked with us, and we opened an office in DC, and we published. Mark actually joined us by writing a report called "Searching for the O Word," and it's as viable today. It should be assigned. All you listeners that are in college, you should find it and read it, because we took advantage of the very first digitalization in USDA.
Wow.
It was called the Current Research Information System, the CRIS system. You may know of it. CRIS went and the system went and digitalized all 30,000 research grants that USDA had made, and had an abstract and had searchable terms to go find them. To make it.
The majority, of course, were conventional.
We analyzed it.
Yeah.
We had a night crew of kids that came in from agroecology that we paid, an hourly wage, and they'd try to get 50 or 100 of them, and we had all the keywords to give them.
Yeah.
And they just got on the internet and said, "Hey, what about this?" So they sourced it out, and the bottom line is, at that time, there were 35 true organic research programs out of 31,000
Wow.
at the USDA. And so we called it Searching for the O Word.
Sure.
And we said, and we used a gentleman named Ronald Reagan's, "I paid for this," the equivalency thereof of this. And we said, this is what the president used to say, it's just fair return on services. Organic is 1% of the economy. We knew that through Davis's ARS papers. So we just want nothing unfair.
Yeah, 1%.
We just want 1% of the ag research budget, which was $70 million.
Sure.
At the time, $700 million. So
Right.
brilliant work, and
Sure.
So that Mark wrote, and Senator Harkin led the charge. We wrote something called the we wrote and passed the OREI, Organic Research and Education Initiative. And Probst gave us $3 million a year.
Wow.
So we were still $67 million short, but government had never funded on-farm organic research.
Right. So
I had fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Working with the NCAT, the National Center of Appropriate Technology, we started administering the ATTRA project, which stands for Appropriate Technology Transfer to Rural Areas. And this was pre-digitized, pre-internet. And, we were relying on some of those farmer testimonials and non-farm organic research to reproduce some of that work and information through the ATTRA publications. Can you give me a little background or history as far as your association with ATTRA and other farmers in the area?
There's an alternative ag library. I don't know if they even call it that anymore, but for a while, it started in Beltsville, the ag library. And again, I'm reaching a little bit into the foggy past. We would refer people to them quite often. And of course, as ATTRA came of age and NCAT came of age, we embraced the few staff, really, and again, if you look at the scheme of things,
right,
and the resources they had, and directed people there, and almost always got, hey, how did it go? Is it real? Or it's organic is still risky for some.
Yeah.
So frankly, in all honesty, I didn't have direct interface with the organizations and the people in the time, but they were part of our, and I'm sure to this day, part of our very limited brothers and sisters who responded to the kind of questions that we couldn't answer, but we knew they could.
Yes.
And the feedback we got was almost universally, wow, God, we never heard of them.
Right.
And maybe even a micro critique to this day is that the marketing and public-facing work of ATTRA and NCAT should be more.
Yeah,
it should be more visible, because
Yes.
The resources you all have are spectacular.
Yes. Well, now in the age of the internet, we're, of course, being able to reach a lot more people, not only here in the country, but worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a pest control advisor for this giant organic vegetable operation, that was my only source of information.
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate that I was in Ventura, California at the time with one of the farms, and got to meet Everett Dietrich,
Mm-hmm.
who's a pioneer, biocontrol entomologist that started, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first insectaries
Mm-hmm.
to sell predators and parasites, to farmers
Mm-hmm.
to release on their fields. But at the same time, we were looking at, planning habitat to harness these naturally occurring predators and parasites into, farm fields, especially organic, since, we were restricted into the amount of pesticides we could use. At the time, I remember we were limited to like safer soap, pyrethrum, sulfur.
I think, did you have BT as a tool?
Yeah,
back then?
BT had just been commercialized and being sold. But yeah, it was one of the first sources that I got, and continued receiving information from them until today. Now that I'm working with them and actually producing some of these publications, it's been very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have time to stay up to date on the freshest sustainable agriculture news, events, and funding opportunities? You can trust NCAT to keep you connected with our weekly harvest e-newsletter. Subscribe today at ncat.org and get your weekly harvest delivered each Wednesday.
One other thing that we did through Jane Suby at OFRF is we cooked up the idea of a scientific congress of organic ag researchers, the SCORE project.
SCORE.
Love acronyms.
Yes.
And Jane kicked it off by doing an analysis of every land grant, and what is it, 1890s?
Yeah.
I sort of forget some of the acronyms, but every one,
Yeah.
to assess their research acreage. Because land grants, they're supposed to have
Sure.
research acreage and greenhouses and students and
Right.
for organic compatibility.
Uh-huh.
And her first, that too, I think is still, particularly sort of for the researchers and the history of this, is a critically important paper, because what we discovered was that out of all the land grants, the total acreage of organic compatible, remember, you can't, I'm going to do an organic research project this
Right.
year.
Unconventional
Last year,
ground.
yeah. Last year there was carbol, and and the next year it's dicamba or something.
Right, right.
And so it just wasn't, you don't, just because you did something, it's not even right. It's not even helpful. She found 400 acres organic compatible in the entire United States of America. and something like 380 were somehow connected to the University of Minnesota. I don't know who did what there and put this
Right.
parcel by, but that was the place.
The biggest.
And people were irritated that UC Santa Cruz wasn't included, but they weren't a land grant.
Right.
And we wanted the
right,
system
right.
to have, and so we had a rather scientists can be a little more difficult to change in their approach or their attitudes, and particularly the administration of some of these research programs.
Yes.
And they just were not that interested in making dedicated organic acreage. We got more research, more people who want to do stuff, more things. We can't set aside
Right.
10 acres or 5 acres for certification in perpetuity, and it's going to take 3 years just to get there.
Yeah.
And we said, that's don't buy it.
Right.
Not going to happen. And we started sending farmers and activists into these different academic institutions. And
Yes.
one by one. Well, Washington State, I think, John Reganold in Washington State
Yes.
really got it.
I'm familiar with
Got a grip.
Well, and I went to school at UC Davis, and there was a student farm there. And Drew Rivers, who owns the Phil Billy, was the
Right.
farm manager at the
Mhm.
time. And I figured, I was being trained in plant sciences and all the horticultural and agronomy, but all conventional. I recall one of my hort professors saying that, he thought the organic movement was a bunch of bullshit. A plant can distinguish between, elemental nitrogen and organic nitrogen. Well, at the time, that's what he thought, but obviously, he didn't look deep enough or research deep enough to realize that that's not true. I think the winds are changing in that respect. To the
They
point
definitely
where
are.
even Cal Poly, which was even more of a conservative anti-organic establishment, now openly, taunts its organic student farm and so forth.
Excuse me, over the years, Davis, pushed a little button there. They keep
Yeah.
saying, well, we have during a good bit of my runs, Mark
Yeah.
Van Horn, and
Oh yeah,
we have the student farm.
right.
That's
And
and the
that-
students
that's
come and they play in the garden.
Yeah.
And there's some classes there, and we have a great teacher. I'm not sure if he's FTE even, but that's
Right.
Who do you guys think you are, saying we don't have this? And we'd say, well, who we think we are? We think we're full-time, professionally successful, economically viable organic farmers, and we want some of your acreage
Right.
dedicated. We'd love the student farm.
Yeah.
Wrong answer.
Right.
Come back to us when you have the right one.
Right.
And then they say, well, we have SAREP. Well,
Right.
Bill's great. It's there. It's funded.
That's Bill Liebhardt.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Bill Liebhardt.
Yeah.
And sorry, Come
Right.
back to us. We want acreage. We want land.
Yeah. Our annual meetings here at Eco Farm at Asilomar, this is the 43rd year or so.
Correct. Yeah.
But before that, there was a so-called Asilomar Declaration.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Some of those folks are still around.
What year was it?
Boy, goodness. It was at Asilomar. Some of the first ones were at
La Honda.
we were in La Honda at a Christian camp in the winter.
And Winter's Firehouse.
And the
or
Winter
something.
Firehouse was the first one or
Yeah.
two. But some folks decided that we needed a proclamation. We needed a declaration of purpose and goals. And we're going to get a bit early and bring our elders and our most famous and recognized people together to come up with our, I don't know how many points there were in the plan, and then post it and the world will follow. And I probably I was not involved in it. I have a little streak of snarkiness that might have shown a little more front-facing opinions on how can we. It's just sort of the arrogance of a declaration when the country, the continents, and the world come at all of this from their place.
Sure.
And our declaration might be of value, it might not, but good luck, and I'll read it.
There were, 800 participants or so?
Well, no, there were 14 or 15 people
Okay.
that came and did it.
Okay.
did the work.
Right.
I've been close ever since Friends of the Earth. Really, I've been pretty close with Wes Jackson, who was one of the gurus invited, and he's freaking brilliant presenter and weaves Copernicus through Socrates with Bob Rodale. His presentations are awesome. How can he read all this stuff?
Right.
So he was there, and afterwards, and they read it. Okay, well, I call it GNA, generally nodded in agreement. I can GNA that, Yeah, okay, sure, good luck. And Wes responds saying, "Oh man, we did it at Essalon and Big Sur, and I'd never really been in a hot tub, and we did some of this. Let's go get another tub. Let's get." And I'll leave the rest of the story for Wes to tell on clothed and unclothed.
Okay.
Like, God, they don't do this in Kansas, So it came out of that.
Sure.
And it was a good thing in the journey.
Great.
I've forgotten about that. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. You recently retired from OFRF,
Yes.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're somewhat involved with the Nell Newman Foundation.
I'm a soundbite kind of guy,
Yeah.
I hide behind the word retirement.
Okay.
It works. I don't do, some years I do as many as 200 interviews.
Wow.
No interviews anymore until you brought me to your
Sure.
podcast, and I'm enjoying this, and I'd like to do it, but it used to be kind of stressful, and I have to think about it and have
Sure.
notes.
Plan.
And and as we've talked throughout this conference, no plan. Say your piece, Bob, and trust me is and edited if you need to. But so that led to Nell Newman, who I've known for 30 plus years. Coming to me and saying, Mom and Dad, Paul Newman and Joanne, have set up a plan for each of the daughter to have their own foundations. Mm-hmm. And for if and when, well, there's always a when you pass away, that the most private of funds will be dispersed 5 ways. So, okay, well, that's cool. And I didn't really kind of think, so you're one of my trustees.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And as a matter of fact, I'm not waiting. I have funds, and I have my Newman's own organic company. So let's go. Let's make grants, and we're going to make them easy. We're going to make them fast, and we're going to make a difference with them. And I said, well, talking my language, I'm there.
Sure.
And there was a third person who both know, James Cox, that both Nell and I have known far longer than I. Mm-hmm. I'm the young guy here, just knowing him since '95, I think, so about 30 years. And here we are. We make grants from a pool of funds. It can be larger if Nell puts something in, James puts something in. I'm sort of the experienced ED, so I keep an eye on everything from tax returns to the minutes.
Sure.
I do I volunteer on all we have staff actually, but I volunteer on the administrative side and the legal side, making sure the dots are crossed and the I's are dotted.
So what kind of work do you guys support? Like farmer research or
we're in
academics?
Everything under the sun.
Everything under the sun.
And the sun shines, for Nell and I at least, on a number of ag projects.
Sure.
Though both of us, she's got, she's a brilliant woman, branched out in a lot of other interests.
Sure.
It's probably fair to say that mine are long game organizing. Started out, I was the first national organizer of Friends of the Earth. I love assisting and networking and, if possible, generating good trouble. And I've been doing it from the beginning. Once I exited my checkered past years, which we'll leave off this podcast, I love it. So I've spent the last many years really back at my roots, organizing and introducing people to each other and connecting ideas to each other, and then funds are available, underwriting it. So I have a couple of women's rights groups that have relationships to good food and nutrition that I've been supporting, specifically in Kansas and South Carolina. I've been supporting a number of Native American initiatives. I don't pretend to know what you should do, but I observe that what you're doing is critically important. So here's some funds.
Sure.
I don't have control. I'm not a tail wagging your dog.
Right.
Go for it. And some media, I'm very much interested in media, investigative reporting, media advocacy. So the fund there as well. And then scholarships.
Oh, definitely.
Don't write me directly.
Just go through the Nell
well,
Newman Foundation.
Don't go through the Nell Newman Foundation.
Okay. Well, edit that out.
No, you can do that. I mean,
Okay.
it's I get it.
Yeah.
But we have observed and been introduced to groups that do a tremendous job organizing students and or making scholarship awards to them. So we've been funding SAFON. I don't know if you know that organization. It's a Southern Organic African Farmers Network. I don't have the exact acronym, but we just give a grant to SAFON and make scholarships as you see fit. Scholarship might be an airplane ride to a conference. It might be a laptop. It might be okra replications, native okra that grandma brought over, or saved from great grandpa.
Yeah.
Was brought over in chains in Africa. So
Great.
And we fund a number of Native American scholarships through the First Nations Development Institute.
Yeah.
Tremendous group there too.
Yes.
You do it. Just let us. We're proud to be part of it. And we fund scholarships for kids to come to EcoFarm.
A lot of work through a lot of times. In closing, how do you see, well, here we are at EcoFarm again at the tail end, but the new generation of farmers and young people carrying the torch? Where do you see organics going? Is it going to go, with this regenerative definition and keep evolving? Because, there's so many terms and it's hard to keep up as far as which way we're going.
How many more podcasts do you have to answer that question?
A lot.
Well, what I see and moves my spirits is the enthusiasm, the brightness, the sponge-like happiness that this conference engages with first and third time attendees.
Yeah.
And particularly this year, after 2 years of the COVID bubble, I'm at an age of, I can sort of say, the kids are making my day every few hours.
Yeah.
That said, organic has always been, excuse the image, but a punk mosh pit. There people were pounding with each other and laughing and dancing and then saying, but,
Right.
In this case, regenerate doesn't mean anything, and that the herd is marching towards that term right now.
Right.
Some of the last organic rules just got posted a couple of days ago on livestock, and they maybe yesterday, and they were supposed to be published and posted in 1994. Deal with it, I mean, it just,
only 30 years behind.
It got sabotaged, it got pulled away,
Yeah.
it got unfunded in certain Republican administrations, and actually the Dems were in some cases just as lousy on the rule making.
Yeah.
So, you're going to define regenerative agriculture?
Right.
Come on. It's just one of 200 plus terms
Sure.
that are largely embraced as a marketing term, though if you scrape that away, there's some great soil research under the conversation of regenerative. So I see EcoFarm as one of the few, really. There's a few others in the country that are the hosts of every idea, every embrace of a new approach. And particularly in the last few years, organic and this community, little bit of pulling, vague bit of kicking, have embraced the far wider whole systems approach to what we're talking about. Listen to the Native Americans after you, dang it, get them here.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to the diaspora of Korean and Japanese. We're not that far away from a freaking concentration camp in California. They call them internment camps.
Right.
listen to the African American experience of the loss of land, and of course listen to the farm workers and field workers from the Tagalog community and the Philippine community and the Mixtex community. They're not all just Latin Mexicans, you know? And EcoFarm has done that. They're here, they're part of us, and you kind of squint a little bit and look around. And damn, I'm looking at a rainbow now. It's beautiful. And,
a lot more inclusive
and you know, sometimes it's a kicking, screaming, you know, come here.
Right.
Somebody might say the wrong thing. Let them know. Don't need to scream. As a matter of fact, you need to hug. And let's rock on.
Great.
And it just totally excited, totally enthused, and totally happy to let Gen O, it's my new quip, soundbite, take over. Kids, come on. Sure. What you waiting for? Take the risks. We did.
Right. And I think they are.
And they are.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Well, great. Thank you for a nice little reminiscent of the movement and where we're at, where we were, where we're at now. And we'll continue to be in touch.
Well, thank you for inviting me to get out of my no interview shell. I always enjoy, it's the storytelling that's really important.
Of course.
Maybe the last thing I'd say really to NCAT and ATTRA and others in sort of in that field of activity is we're losing our elders. We're not capturing in many cases their history, their journey. And I'm quite passionate about the organic oral history storytelling activities. There's not nearly enough of it. And I hope there's more of it everywhere. And it's got to be somewhat indigenous to place.
Sure.
You can't get the Vermont NOFA origin story.
That's true.
Here, well, actually, you sort of could. There's a woman here from the Vermont Law School, has an organic legal training project.
Yes.
How cool is that?
I saw the stand. Well, yeah, that's part of reasons for these podcasts. I've also interviewed Tom Wiley, Amigo Cantasano, and yourself now, and I'm sure there'll be more in the future.
Great. Well, I really appreciate it, and I have 70 more names for you. So it's
Okay.
Just kidding.
Again, thanks a lot.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.incat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.